I'm going to go ahead and start recording. I don't know how many of you actually need this. I know a couple of you do. I know Brandon was aiming for this. I think some of you may be able to find some value in this, whether you recognize it or not. Catherine, I think you and Ethan may have some opportunities to use this. So I mean, there's like kind of look for ways in which you could use this, but I know a handful of you need a character with a face, but you don't want to rig a full 3D face. So even if you're not doing it for this project, this is something that you could use for other tasks, other sequences, right? Let's say you have a screen that you need to be able to program or to be able to rig how you control what shows up on that screen. Like a computer screen, you want to rig like text happening at a very specific pace or something like that. This is another method in which we can do that. So I'm going to go through this. If this applies to you, hop in and watch. If not, just I get it, but I do think that you're going to see some things in here that you could utilize in other ways as well. So, so we're going to talk about it. How many of you are doing a 2D face on your character? Brendan, Mally, anybody else? Not sure. Okay. So the last class I had quite a bit more, so you can always go back and watch that video if you want to as well. I have a couple of things in here, and you can actually see these files if you'd like up in the 3D animation. I have under the resources folder 2D face rig, and you'll see that I have a PSD file in here, which for some reason Windows has no idea what should open a PSD file. Let's go ahead and tell it.
Yeah,
it's
Windows likes to screw up on you when you try to open something.
So give it a second here. It's opening on the other screen. It's kind of scary when you first see it because all the layers are turned on at once. Come on, Photoshop. Here we go. Rawr, angry face. But if you look at this, what we have is I have multiple eyebrows. I have multiple mouths. And I have all of these in their own layers, right? So each of these have its own layer. And eyes, I have these eyeballs, and I have a blink version of the eyes or a not blinked version of the eyes. So the less scary version looks like this. I've broken this up with each of these pieces in its own layer. And to get these out of here as a layer, we can export out each of these layers, or each of these layers as a different image. Before we do that, though, I'm going to show you that there's like probably 5 or 6 different ways you can do this. Some of these are going to be more technical, but give you more feedback inside of Maya. Some of them, you're going to get no feedback inside of Maya, and you're going to be hopping back and forth between 2 programs, right? So if you're going to animate in 2D, if you're wanting to do a 2D animation sequence on this box, where it's a flat color and the face shape just changes at certain intervals. Let's say you're doing a lip sync. I think this sequence or this method actually works if you're going to have fewer changes and the timing on those changes is not going to be overly complicated, right? So that would be to actually just do all of this in Toon Boom and import it in as an image sequence, right? So the method in which you do that, we have our box. I'm going to go to Windows, Modeling Editor, my UV editor, right? And so this is our UVs. And if I go in here and look, if this is where I want the face to show up, right? That is these sections right here, right? Which means all of the animation on the face I would just want to happen in this corner. So one of the ways I could do this is export out this this image, right? So go to Image, UV Snapshot, 2048 by 2048. I'll save this as a PNG, and I'm just going to put all of this on a folder on my desktop, just for purposes. So UV, apply and close. And what I have now is in my face folder on my desktop, I just have this UV image with an alpha channel, right? And so now I can draw over this inside of Photoshop or Toon Boom or wherever in this section right here. So I can open up Toon Boom. So it's Harmony, H-A-R-M-O-N, so Harmony Premium right there. And the first thing I want to do is create my own custom preset for the layout, right? So it's got all of these presets here in my camera size. Sorry, it's still loading something. Oh, okay. So it's got all these presets in the camera size. None of these are actually what I need. I need 2048 by 2048 because that's the image I exported, right? So what I'm going to do is I want to create a new one, new camera size, 2048 by 2048, right? So I get these two, or I get this square file. I got to name it, so I'll call this Maya texture res and hit create. I also want to make sure frame rate is correct, 24. That's what Maya is going to be, so we'll hit create. And so now I can just make this like Maya face texture scene. Create scene. So inside of Toon Boom, now we just get this stage that is the size of a texture map, right? What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and import in my UVs. So File, Import Image, and I'll just import that image from my desktop. And hit OK, and there it is. So we have this drawing layer. I'll call that face anim. Okay. And let's say 60 frames, that sounds good. Let's say I'm going to do a quick little drawing, very clumsily in my, with my mouse here. I'm going to do a quick little drawing of a face. Here. There we go. If I want to see this face throughout the whole thing, I have to hit F5 out here on the very last key, and that extends it through the whole thing, right? Now this image that I'm seeing here, I'm using my UVs just for layout purposes, right? So I can know where to draw this. But if I were to just export out this image as it is right now, then that face shape would show up on the box, right? So we all kind of understand that. How many of you have had the lighting and rendering class? Okay. So Toon Boom, I can just start making new drawings, right? So let's say I needed my character to make the to make an O shape, like he's like, or like an ah shape, right? Bless you. If I just go out here, let's say that animation happened on frame 10. If I just go out here and start drawing on it, it's going to affect the entire drawing, right? So what I have to do is I have to create a duplicate of this. I can create a completely blank frame and just redraw everything from scratch by clicking this button. But what I really want to do is I want to make a duplicate of this frame that I can edit without messing up the other one. So if I create a duplicate frame, now I can start editing this drawing. Right, so maybe I erase a little bit of it here. Let me move this shape down a little bit. Oh, that's very Gesundheit, whatever. And draw a little bit something like this, right? And so now I have this as the new mouth, right? So he's going from smile to that. Right? Let's say later I needed an O shape, right? I can grab this, thank you. Create a duplicate drawing there. and maybe select all of this. I can resize the whole thing, something like this. So I'm getting all of these drawings here, and like we'll do one more here. Let's do a B shape. So maybe for that I just delete this entirely, and I do right. So these are the shapes I have so far. Right? I'm able to draw them kind of quickly and get what I want. Right. Now, why Toon Boom is actually really nice in terms of 2D animation, Brandon actually mentioned that there is an auto lip sync tool in this. It's not that great. It always makes the safest choices, which pretty much means it listens to audio and it kind of opens and closes the mouth on the right shapes. For me, like lip syncing in here is actually really quick though. The problem is you have to be able to sync it up in this timeline and in Maya's timeline. So you have to look at your animation in Maya and say, okay, I'm going to need this character to start talking on frame 35, and so that way when you come into Toon Boom, you start lip syncing on frame 35, and like really doing voice acting that way would be a pain in the butt. However, if you do need to switch in and out of this, you can keep dialing in these different poses anytime you want to. So I have 4 different drawings here now that make this up. If I go to my library, you'll see that whenever I'm on one of those frames, like this is drawing number 4, right? And back here, it's drawing number 2. So at any point I want to dial in one of those poses again, I could go to here and change that to 2, and it will put that in. And so this is how you would lip sync, is you would very quickly go through here, make these changes you need to. And if you get to a point where you're like, wait, I need a blink, right? I can duplicate that frame and change my drawing to blink. So when you hit play, you'll see that this is what we're kind of getting with that animation. Let me just dial in some quick poses really quick. So again, if I hit play, we have that, right? Now again, this will work best if you just need your characters to change poses here and there, right? Not necessarily to do a full lip sync, because then you have to get the lip sync to line up both in Maya and in Toon Boom. But let's say your character just blinks every now and then, or your item just sort of changes a little bit randomly. Then a sequence like this works fine. Really, to make this work, all I have to do is export out these 60 frames and wire that into Maya as an image sequence, right? So I would hide my UVs. I need a color in there, just so I'm not exporting out, because right now how this actually looks is this, which is black lines on a black background. So if I need an actual color in there, I'm going to add a color card, right? And then on that color card, I can double click on it and change that to any color I want, right? So I like pink. Pink's nice. There we go. And so now we get this face that has all this on it, and whenever I am ready, I can render the right node. So I go File, Export, Render Right Nodes. Now, you're going to need a little bit more detail than that, or a little bit more information than that, because what is that? What sort of file are you going to get out of that? It's not really clear, right? So the thing we do is we go find our right node. If we go into our node view, it's right there. That's the right node. but I can double click on it all day long. I can't see any information. The way I have to do that is to go up here and add layer properties. And so now you see that whatever I have selected, I'll be able to see the properties of that. And if I click my right node, you'll see it's going to export into a folder called frames. It's going to name it this. It's going to start with frame 1. It's going to number it like this. And it's using a drawing type of a target, TGA. I usually use PNG. If you need transparencies on this, you would use PNG 4, I think it is, and make sure that it's, I think that's how you would set the transparencies. I really don't need transparencies on this, so I can just use a JPEG and go File, Export, Render Right Nodes, and it's just going to render out all 60 of those images. Now let's go look at where that's at. I just put my project in my documents here. You'll see Maya face textures under this frames folder. Now I have this frame sequence, and as I click through them, you'll see different ones change, right? So this is a pretty simple way of doing it, which is to just go into Maya. Where's Maya? Is Maya closed? Oh, there it is. Go into Maya, right click, assign new material. Go ahead and make this an AI standard surface and map that into our color channel. So we'll go choose that file. Open. And then I would just, if I hit 6, we'll see the first frame. But if I go in here and choose use image sequence, what will happen is as I go through here, it will change at the appropriate time until I get to frame 61 where it disappears. So you have to, because there isn't a frame 61 exported. So it's all it's looking for is when it's on frame 55, it's looking for image 55 right there. So that is sort of the brute force way. Like if you have to do it just to get a sequence together, there's no rigging involved in this at all, right? This is all, you're doing a 2D image sequence in a 2D program, and then to make this work inside of Maya, you have to go in and just wire it in there and place it, right? This would work for any type of sequence. You could render something out of Premiere. Like if you have a video and you want that to be on a screen inside of your animation, you could render that out of Premiere as an image sequence and just map this in to Maya. However, this means we can't animate inside of Maya. Like if I wanted to do something complicated like a lip sync on a character rig, I'm doing all of my animation on the texture in one program and then having to bounce back in here to see if it lines up in 3D. You can always go back and change have both programs open at the same time, go back and change it in 2D and come in here and see if it worked. But that's a lot of back and forth. So some of you may want to actually rig a character in 2D inside of Maya. We're still going to use some of these techniques, but I'm going to do it in the most complicated way possible, recognizing that this is going to cover all the techniques that you're going to need to use if you're doing it in a simpler way, okay? Because I want to be able to use this character here, and I want to be able to use all of the layers, and I want to break him up into multiple pieces, right? I also want other controls, like I want to be able to move his mouth up and down, or his eyes side to side, not just leave them stuck in one position. So this would be ideal, the ideal way of setting up this rig. I'm not going to do the full thing. I'm going to do the parts that, like some of these parts are just repetition of the same thing. And so I'll do the mouth, and I'm going to do the black parts of the eye to show you how to set that up. Okay? Oh, screen went away. There it goes. So I'm going to apply a new texture here, assign new material, AI standard surface. There we go. And so probably the easiest way to do this is to do a layered texture, okay? Because I have multiple channels I'm wanting to be able to change dynamically. I want to be able to change the mouth poses and the eye poses at the same time, right? On top of that, all of my mouth shapes and face shapes, they're all just 2D lines with no background, right? If your character is just a solid color, then it's not that big of a deal. But if your character has like if you wanted this character to be talking on top of a wood grain texture, right, or on top of some other texture, then you have some extra things to do. So what we're going to do is use a layered texture for our color map. Okay. So what that means is there can be multiple images mapped into this, and certain parts will show in certain areas. So if I go in here, AI standard surface, choose my color. I'm going to go ahead and put a checkerboard on here just so we can kind of see this, right? And under my 2D texture stuff, I'm going to repeat this. I think 15 and 15 was looking pretty good earlier. Yeah, so something like this, right? And of course, I have this in Arnold set up to where when I hit play, I'm able to see what our render looks like, right? We'll bring that back up in a minute. So I actually just did that wrong. Let me go back. That is something I need to do, but let's talk a little bit. I'm going to use this mess up as another way of showing this. So all I have now mapped into this is my checker texture, right? That's what's driving the color. But I want more than one object to drive this color. So I'm going to click on my hypershade, which is this blue ball with a little white dot in it, right? And this is where we can see all of our shaders. If I right-click on AI Standard Surface, Graph Network, right, you'll see that what we have is checker right here, and our out color is mapped into our base color, right? But I want multiple things mapped in there. And so for that, I need a layered shader. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to disconnect this. So we didn't have to do it this way. I could have done this after I did the layer shader. I just got carried away. So if I go in here and look at my AI standard surface, now nothing is mapped into color. And I can click on here and start typing layer at the top. And I'm going to use this layered texture. So not a layered shader, but a layered texture. There's another material we can use for this under Arnold. Arnold has a shader that is called AI, where's it at? It's like AI layer shader right there. And it will work as well, but right now I think I just want this layered texture, or let's see, yeah, layered texture. And what you'll see is this layered texture is now what's mapped into our color. And with that, I can have multiple images that are all layering into this. So for my inputs, on input 1, I'm going to map my out color into color, and that's all. And so you'll see that this actually still looks the same. If I render this now, it looks the same. But what I have the option of doing now is adding additional layers to this. So I can add another layer, and you'll see as soon as I do, it adds another input here. Now this layer is currently, I'm trying to see if I can scale this so you can see all of it at the same time. So here we go. So this second layer I just created, right here, it is behind my checker layer, right? And so if I middle click, I can drag it in front, and so now it's the one that takes precedent. So the thing you can notice is I can turn it on and off with the visibility, and then I have these blend nodes as well. So I can apply a multiply to it, or I can do darken, whatever, and it's going to darken the layer underneath it. So this is like a Photoshop layer. Whatever I'm doing here is happening to the next one down. I usually set this to over, which means it's going to override it, and if I have an alpha in there, then it will be okay. So I can, instead of this green color, I'm going to go in here and I'm going to go look for my first instance of the mouth texture. So to show you how I got this, if you go to File, and then, where's it at? File, Export, and then Layers to Files, like this, and set this to PNG8. I uncheck Trim Layers. It's going to kick out a whole bunch of images. Now I've already done this. You can actually see this up on the network. And that's what it gives us here, is all these layered images, which is each of the images on its, or each of the layers in its own image, right? What I did is I took a few minutes and I went through and I named them, right? So you'll see here I have mouth 1, mouth 2, mouth 3, mouth 4, mouth 5, mouth 6, all of this all the way up to mouth 9. And those are going to go in the order in which I want to think about them, right? So they all kind of have a sequence, right? The same with the brows. The brows 1 is the one I'm going to use the most, and these others are going to just sort of be a following sequence. The eyes only have 2, open and close. And then there's this eyeball, which is just these black dots, right? So this is what I have exported out, and this is what I'm going to use to drive my texture here. So copy, I'll go ahead and put this on my desktop. Okay, so that file I mapped in there, I'm just going to go find the first mouth. So it's on the desktop, face images, mouth 1. And when I open it, this is where stuff starts getting complicated. So if I were to render this now, I get this, which is not useful at all. Like, that doesn't even look like the mouth. And the reason I'm getting that is because I didn't even think about the UVs when I was creating this. In fact, I did most of these face shapes in Procreate on the iPad. Like, I wasn't even thinking about my UVs. If I go to Windows, Modeling Editor, and look at my UV editor, you'll see how my mouth is lining up with that box. Right? Now, I could change these UVs to where it lined up correctly, but if I do that, then I mess up my checkerboard texture in the background. That's not the end of the world, and maybe the way that you set this up, that's fine for the way you want to do it. But what I want to do is layer this in there with a completely different set of UVs. So some of you may not have even known that one object can have multiple UV sets. This becomes super, super handy. In fact, it's especially if you're using video games. Depending on, you can basically have different materials look at your UVs in different ways, right? As if UVs were not complicated enough. So what I'm going to do is, you'll notice up here under UV sets, it has map 1 chosen. That's the name of my current UV set. I'm going to go to UV set editor, and you'll see that this is, my map 1. I'm just going to rename that one default. So that's my default UV set. I'm going to create a new one, and I'm going to name this one mouth. Rename mouth. Okay? Update. Now, here's the thing to notice. I have my box selected. There are absolutely no UVs in this right now. Right? I still have to create them. There's no instructions on how to line this up with the model. So I don't actually need these UVs to line up with everything. I just need the pieces that I want to line up with my mouth. Right? So I'm going to go in here, select the faces where I want the mouth to be. So it's going to be these 4. And then I'm going to go to UV planar. And what that's going to do is it's going to planar map my UVs for the mouth, and I can kind of line that up to where the mouth fits right in it. Okay? Now again, if I hit render, it still looks the same though. It doesn't look like I actually changed anything. I just haven't told the texture to look at that new UV set. So the way we change that is to right click on the object and say UV sets. And I'm going to go to UV linking. So you'll see that if I choose default, both my checker texture and my file 2 are using that UV set. If I click mouth, nothing is using it, but if I click file 2, now my mouth is in the right place, okay? Which means all I have to do now is make this an image sequence and fix my transparency and do a whole bunch of other stuff. So let's go back to our hyper shade here. So for this file 2, I like to rearrange these so we can kind of see them a little bit better. So for this file 2, I need my alpha to be mapping in here as well. So currently, I'm not able to see the checkerboard underneath there because there's no alpha. So if I take my out alpha into the alpha for input 1 right here, that should work. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong one. My out alpha into this input. There we go. So now I have that checkerboard pattern underneath my teeth. I'm actually going to go in here and play with that checkerboard just a little bit, just to take some of that contrast down. Does not look right. Okie doke. That'll work, I guess. My checkerboard's not dynamically changing here. I think just for clarity's sake, so we can see, I'm just going to remap this checkerboard into layer 2, just so we can see it a little bit better. I don't want it to be completely black. I think it's where I disconnected it earlier. So that should work better. Arnold. Yeah, and then place my 2D 15. Okay, so hopefully you can kind of see that now. So here's where this gets a little bit more complicated. Actually, every step of this gets more complicated, so we're going to keep working on it. Currently, my file is set to be just a single image. So no matter what I do in here, right, it's not updating. Right? It's not doing anything different. It's always staying that mouth. I can set this to be an image sequence, and what we'll see is after I go to frame 2, that mouth will change, and then frame 3, that mouth will change. But I only have 9 mouths, right? Which means that I get 9 frames, and then after that, the mouth just disappears for the rest of the animation. What I want to do is I want to drive those mouth changes by something different. So look at image number here. In my texture, image number is purple. What does it mean when a value changes color in Maya? Yeah, something else is driving it, right? So when it changes to red, what's that mean? Keyframe. When it changes to yellow, that's usually a direct connection. Does anybody know what purple is?
Is it connected to like a file or something?
Could be a file. So
Maybe something outside of Maya.
Outside of Maya. Well, let's think about it. It's the image number. What is driving the image number in this sequence? So yeah, it's the PNG number, right? So like what's happening there is 17, it's looking for PNG number 17, and the reason is because we are on frame 17. So the frame is what is driving that, right? The frame is changing our number. Like whatever frame we're on, it will change this image number sequence here, right? Now, if we right click on here and see what this actually is that's driving it, it's actually an expression. So, how many of you have taken TD? So you had to write some expressions in there, maybe a little bit? Right. So we can change this expression very easily. If I go to edit expression, what you'll see is file2 frame extension equals frame, right? So whatever frame we're on is going to drive our frame extension. I can change this script and make it something else. I could say instead of the frame changing this, it could be some value on a controller somewhere. It could be my translate Y. It could be a new attribute I make. The other thing I can do though, and this is kind of the way I like to do it, although I will say I've had some problems with this not always staying broken, is if I right click on this and just say delete expression, now I can just type in numbers there. I want to type in 3, and type in 3, right? So now that's just a new value that I can change. The problem with this is every time I delete that expression, somehow Maya tries to come back in there and put it back. Like Maya somehow is like, nope, that's not deleted and that's supposed to be connected here, so I'm going to reconnect it. Especially if I unclick use image sequence and then re-click it, like usually it'll come back. Now it's going to prove me wrong now. But I deleted the expression. I didn't just break the connection, I deleted it, right? So that means that value isn't in there anymore. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make something else drive that image change, okay? So how I do this is hit stop. I can go out here, create us a little controller of some sort. And like I said, any of these values here could now drive that value if I wanted it to. But instead of doing that, I want to go modify, freeze transformations, and I'm going to create a new attribute in here. So if I go modify, add attribute, add attribute. You all have done this before, so let's just say M, just so we see this. Currently it's set to float. So if I add a float attribute here, right, you'll see that that number can be anything. It can be 4.2. But what we're driving is a frame number, and there is no frame 4.2. There's only whole number frames, right? So let's undo what I just did there. I don't want to create that attribute anymore. I'll just go back and delete it in a minute. If I do integer, this works pretty well, actually. And I can set my default to 1, right, and hit add. Wait, we'll call this mouth integer. And hit add, right? And that means that this mouth integer can only be a whole number. Right? So that's nice, because my frames can only be a whole number. The only problem with this is if I'm animating using this and I'm saying, I want mouth number 3. I don't always know what 3 is. Was that the M shape or was that the whatever, you know? So the third option that we have in here is called enum, right here. This means I can make a drop-down box that has a whole word in it. And that word will be tied to an integer, okay? So if my first one is none, none equals 0, okay? And my second one is smile big is 1. And smile, that's 2, right? So we can keep doing this and line them up with the face shapes I have, right? So mouth 2 or mouth 3 is this like sad, right? And then we got this M shape, and then this P shape. So let's say sad M, oh, sorry, M P, what was my other ones here? Open 1, open 2, open 3, and F, right? So I'm going to say O1, O2, O3, and this is like FV, right? And if I hit add on that, I'm going to give this a name. We'll call this mouths, because this is the one I'm actually going to use. I was just showing you those others of how it's working. And hit OK. Now I get this drop-down box where I can pick each of these. And if I pick smile, it's really setting that to 2. I just have a name for what to call that, right? And this is setting it to 0. The top one will set it to 0. So now it's just a matter of setting up a connection, right? So I go to my channel box here, my file, and what I'm looking to change is this frame extension, and I'm looking to change it with this mouths. So Windows, General Editor, Connection Editor. So here we go, mouths. And what I'm wanting to change is on this file here. So I hit reload right. And so it's this frame extension, right? So I click mouths, frame extension. I'm going to go ahead and hit close on that. Now, as it is right now, it's set to none, which means it's not showing any of the mouths. It looks like it just turned off my material, but if I were to render this, where did that go? Oh, where's my render view? Oh, here it is. Yeah. If I were to render this, you'll see that it's still rendering the box. It's just not showing me my my image because there's nothing on that image, right? If I set it to smile big, there it is. And of course, this is keyframeable, right? If I set this to M, there it is. So, so I can very quickly go through and set keyframes on this now for whatever mouths I want. If I discover halfway through this, oh, I need 5 more mouths. I go into Photoshop, I save those out as mouth 10, mouth 11, mouth 13, and then I go back into that edit attribute and I add more enums on that list, right? So I will say there is one weakness in this method, and that is that what I'm seeing here in my viewport is not accurate to what I'm getting in my render, right? And it gets worse before it gets better, right? If I decide I want to put eyes on here as well and then eyebrows, like basically that image is never really going to show me the correct thing. Part of that is because it's an Arnold material, part of it it's a layered material, part of it's viewport 2.0. I think that there's some very very like tedious workarounds for it. My workaround for it though is that Arnold renders really fast in this open viewport thing. What I would do for me is I would take this, make it a little bit smaller here, right? I would go into my viewport settings and I would turn down my render quality super low while I'm animating and just use this as a proxy viewport. Okay, so I lower this down to like 1, or you can go to 0, turn down my diffuse to 1, all of these other things, I can turn it completely off, right? And now my viewport is updating almost in real time. It's just an ugly viewport, right? But I can totally see what my character is supposed to look like this way. The reason I would say to work this way is because the newest version of Arnold just came out, and in the new version of, we don't have it here yet, in the newest version of Arnold, they actually have an Arnold viewport renderer, which means instead of just using viewport 2.0, you can use Arnold as your renderer of what you're seeing in your viewport at all times. I have a feeling that's going to make Arnold crash all the time, or it might make Maya crash all the time. But really that's what I'm doing right here is I've just turned down my quality really low and I'm kind of using my live viewport as a temporary solution to this. If you want it to be even faster, you can choose this render region section here. Draw yourself a little region here, and it's only going to update the stuff that's within that box. So, yes?
Is it going to be an option to still use Viewport 2.0?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But really what's happening right now is my material's kind of complicated, and Viewport 2.0 doesn't know what to do with it. And I think that there's a way I could work around that. That was one of the things that was holding me back on giving this lecture. It's like, I really want to fix that for you. But I was rather, I decided you being able to start working on this was more important than me figuring out a solution and making you wait 2 or 3 more days. So I think that this would be the way I would work with it, is just using the Arnold hardware render. Why does that do that? There we go. This Arnold render view with our render settings really low to see what that is. The only thing you have to do is remember to go back in and change these samples under the Arnold tab back up to something realistic when it comes time to render. So let's keep making this more complicated. Hopefully you see now that all you have to do if you want to make this even more, like you want to do the eyebrows and the eyes, you just have to add another layer on this material, right? So we could do the same thing for the eyebrows. We could do the same thing for the eye shapes. I'm going to do one more because I think there's other things we can do with this material that's kind of nice, including what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the eyeballs to it, right? So I'm going to click out here, make another layer, middle click, drag this over to here, and what you'll see is, if I take off that render region, my entire object went green again, right? So I want to put the eyeballs up here, right? So on my texture here, this new map, I'm going to go ahead and map in another file, and I'll choose this eyeball. Now this doesn't need an image sequence. It's just a dot, right? That always stays in the same spot. One of the things you'll notice in this is that you need to change your blend mode to over to even be able to see anything anymore. And if I tumble around here, you'll start to see that like that dot, like the eyes are kind of like hidden because of the UVs, right? It's still looking at that other UV layer. So I need to do another set of UVs on this again, right? So I'm going to go ahead and hit stop on this. I'm going to select these faces, because this is where I want to do my UVs. I'm going to go to my UV editor, right? And again, I'm going to, wait, where is this? Where's my menu? So I don't know what happened to my menu up here. So let's see. It's under UV sets. I'm going to do UV set editor there. We can also get to that from here. And in this UV set editor, for this object, right, I have default and mouth. I'm going to make a new one. I'll call it eyes, right? And I can go ahead and close that. So you'll see that I'm in that set now, right? However, I am still looking at the mouth shape. We can always change back and forth to this. We can go to the checker. We can go to, I'm going to go to eyeballs. Right? And what I want is these 4 faces right here. To be where I map my eyes to, right? So go UV, again, planar mapping. I can sort of size these up to where it lines up with the eyes pretty well, right? There we go. And again, to make this actually work, I have to right click on the object, UV sets, UV linking, and under eyes, I need to choose file 3. So now they're going to line up with that, and that looks pretty good. If I hit render though, let's see what we get. Anything? Oh, please don't crash. Really? Still happen. Or not. All right. See you, Maya. Let's see if it gives me the option to reopen that file. Sometimes it does. So I'm not going to go through all that again. I'll kind of just fix the box to the, I'll just talk about the eyes for right now, because I can get it back to that point pretty quickly. So again, face. So I'm going to do layer. This one, I'll go ahead and do the whole checkerboard part of this with the eyes overlaying it, just so you can see it. So the second texture, we'll skip the mouth for right now and I'll just show you this with the eyes. Second texture in here was the eyes. So face, got those chosen. I'm going to go UV sets, create empty UV set, and I'll switch to that new empty UV set. UVs, planar, this to there. Can I get these eyes just sort of fitting in there a little bit better? And again, object mode, UV sets, UV linking. So that one, apply to that one. And of course, I need to map my out alpha for my eyeball into actual alpha. So what that should mean now is we are, at least for the eye part, we are back up and going. Render view, if I hit play again. Oh, I have to set this top layer to over. There we go. And so now we got those eyes on there. The mouth part's broken, but you don't want to sit and watch me do that again. So really the only thing I wanted to show you with this is that there are other things we can change in this and why this is powerful, right? Because in our place 2D texture node here, right, we have the option to offset our UVs. So if I set that to like 0.1, oh, remember what? Let's do that again. 0.1. It's going to shift our eyes over, or vice versa. If I wanted to do negative 0.1, it shifts them in the other direction. So I have the ability to move those around on this character in order to get a little bit more of a dynamic face on this, right? So the problem with that is this is a big number, right? Like if I wanted to move it really small amounts, I would have to do like 0.01, right, to get little bitty eye shifts. If I connect this to a new attribute in here, I'm going to modify add attribute. Even if I make this a float attribute, it's still going to, let's see, I vert, add, and then I'll do I horizontal, add. Like these numbers at the least are going to update at 0.1, 0.3, and that's big jumps for this eye movement. So we're going to have to do a little bit of math on this to fix it, right? Not hard math, it's easy math. So I'm going to go in here to modify, Windows General Editor, Connection Editor, right? And so there's my eye vertical, eye horizontal, right? And then I'm also going to open up my material editor here, choose that 2D texture node, and reload right on that, right? So the thing you'll notice is I have this offset on here. So I need to figure out which one offset U is. Offset U is side to side, so that's my horizontal. So I'll connect eye horizontal to offset U, eye vertical to offset V. And you'll start to see what the problem is with this, is that if I go in here and move these, like they move really big, right? Like that's a big range to move. And if I want just a little bitty tiny movement, I have to go in there and type it in. One of the easy workarounds for this is if you hold control when you're adjusting these values, it will go down to hundredths, so you can get really small motion. But still, that's just a little bit of a pain in the butt to work with. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up the node editor and fix it. So Windows Node Editor. How many of you have used the node editor before? All right. The node editor is amazing. I love it. So with this control selected, I'm going to click this button right here, this middle one, to graph in everything, right? And what you'll see is my, where's it at? NURB circle, right, is currently the horizontal and eye vertical are driving my offset U and offset V, right? But they're driving them at 1-to-1, right? If I go in here and set that to 1, then that means my offset is set to 1, right? And what I really want is I want it to do a little bit of math. If I set this to 1 on my NURB circle, I wanted to set it like 0.1 on the other one, on the actual offset, right? So what I'm going to do is a math node in here. So if I right click, create node, and I do a multiply divide node right here, this should do the trick. So I know you all are not always the most excited about math, right? But math like at this level is pretty simple, right? We have the option to, on this multiply divide node, basically we have 1x and 2x. Whatever is in 1x will get multiplied by whatever is in 2x, right? So if I map in my I horizontal into 1x, and then on my output, I take my x and map that into offset u, right? It's going to replace my original connection, and now it's just this one piece right here that's driving it. And you'll see what happens though is if I type in 2 on this one, I'm sorry, this is on horizontal. If I type in 2, right, it's going into this math node and it's saying 2 times 1, and what is 2 times 1? 2, right? So nothing changed. In my current multiply divide node, everything is being multiplied by 1, which means it's not changing at all. If I wanted it to change, I would have to make this number something different. So if I multiplied it by 3, right, then we get 2 times 3 equals 6, right? If I wanted to make that change smaller though, I could put a decimal in there. So 2 times, let's say 0.2, right, is 0.4. And so now we're able to get a smaller motion when I move that, right? I could even do that multiply divide by 0.1 and it would be even more subtle, right? If I go in here, no, my vertical is still locked to that. So it's even more smooth and subtle, and I can get a little bit of that going on. So I'm just going to do the same thing with my vertical. I'll change that to 0.2, map in ivert to input y, map my y out to offset v. What just happened? Let's just set both of those back to 0. And so now what I should be able to get is a little bit of vertical, a little bit of horizontal, and I have more control over how that's going to render out. Where is that? Okay. So you can have a combination of both of these. If I have my mouth node set up the way I had it before I broke it, I could also go in there and play around with that vertical and horizontal offset and be able to slide my mouth up and down a little bit. I could push it from side to side. One of those UV nodes will actually allow you to rotate it a little bit. I would have to look at that to remember exactly which one. So this is the method that I would strongly advise if you're planning on doing any sort of lip sync in 3D. Again, I know not everybody's using this, and I know this is sort of like a little niche part of rigging. But what this allows us to do is pretty much go back and forth between 2D and 3D in terms of style, right? Not everything has to look like Toy Story. And there's lots of other times when you're going to need to be able to show this, right? To be able to show a controllable change in a sequence, right? So this is the method I would use to do that. I'm going to go ahead and, any questions on this? Yeah.
How do you make your graphics or things into a symbol on a line?
Yeah, give me a second, we'll come to that one. Any question about the Maya rigging part? All right, cool. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and stop this, and I'll kind of hop around, check in on everybody, see if there's any questions on anything else you're working on. How are you feeling about the project right now? I just see Megan's head shaking. Like, no? Okay. I'll swing by your desk, Megan. Make sure everything's okay. So this is, I will say, like, one of the reasons I show you this is because rigging a full face is a lot of work. And that's not to say I'm discouraging you from doing that. It's to say that, like, when we talked about this at the very beginning, to develop a style that was accomplishable, this was sort of one of the things I had in mind that would allow you to chop parts of the rigging out of the pipeline and focus a little bit more on a stylistic decision. If you decide to do full face rigging, that's completely fine. But recognize what this can be used for, right? Even with a full face rig, let's say you wanted your character's brows to furrow, and you wanted to change the wrinkles in their brow when they did that without having to have a super dense mesh, right? You can use this same technique to drive a change in your displacement map or your normal map, right? So this is something that you can use in a lot of different places. I have a feeling that everybody in the class could potentially use it in some way. But we'll talk a little bit more about how this is useful to you, if at all, like sort of one-on-one. So I have another day dedicated in this class for another animation lecture. And I have some ideas of things I'd like to cover, but I also recognize that, like, literally half of my other class is using this method, and I think maybe only 1 or 2 people in here are using this method. Every class is different. If there's something specific you need to know, I would love to, like, have the opportunity to teach you a custom set of little things, right? I want there to actually be some reasonable instruction in here that you can use. So if there's something you're needing to know, if there's something you're curious about, and you think it would be a good option for a full class lecture, please hit me up on that. Anything that you're curious about, I can kind of do an impromptu lecture on it or whatever. Otherwise, when we come in next class period, unless some other stuff comes up, it may be more work time than actual lecture time. So, all right, cool. I'm going to go ahead and shut this down. Oh, did I mention Michelle already? No, I don't think I have. Okay. One last thing, and I'll go ahead and say this on the video for anybody who may be watching later. Michelle Maynard is going to be doing a guest lecture or a guest talk tomorrow night with the Edge Club up at 290. She currently is lead designer at Oxide Games, but she's been like a whole bunch of different titles. She has written and created her own board games and card games that she publishes. She's been a teacher, she's been a writer, she wrote a book on how to use Unity. So I really would like to encourage you all to come out and hear her talk. She'll also, she'll probably be one of the more entertaining guest speakers ever. Like, she is super interesting and funny. But one of the specific reasons I really wanted to get her to speak is because currently, right now, in the games industry, and I suspect that the numbers are very similar in animation just in general, only 20% of the workforce is female, right? Over half of the workforce in America is female, but only 20% in the game and entertainment industry is female. I have a feeling that that's because, like, when I was a student here, there was like 2 females in the entire department. Now we're almost 50-50. Like, I don't know the exact numbers, but it's pretty close. Every class you're in, you'll probably look around, the male to female ratio is pretty even, right? Which means that 20% is getting ready to change, and you all are part of that change. So this is not me just talking to the girls. Like, guys, like, this is a this is how the industry should be. And I think that there's resistance to that just across the board, or not across the board, in a lot of circumstances. So I wanted you to hear from a strong female in the industry, and her name was the first one that popped into my head. So she's an extremely strong voice. So come out and hear her talk. Like, she has really got a lot of, I think, going to have a lot of interesting things to say. So. Any questions you have about any of that, let me know. The other thing I would say is, I forget the time, but Mark Thomas, an animator from Bethesda, is the next guest speaker after Michelle. But she's tomorrow night up in 290, which is that middle lab, and they're just going to do a Skype call with her. So come out and check that out. Any questions on anything? I'll also point out, like, we're kind of missing a lecturer or a guest speaker on that. We had one guy who was going to, and then we kind of lost contact with him. I think he got busy. Is there anything, if there's anything that you would like to hear, any specific guest speakers, specific concentrations? I think right now we're trying to find somebody in visual effects to go speak, and Catherine may have already gotten a hold of somebody about that, but if there's anything you're interested, like, I am completely cool with cold calling some people and getting a conversation going on with. It's hard to get people from the animation and game industry to come hang out with us here in East Tennessee. So we can call them though and have a conversation. So just let me know if you come up with any ideas or anybody you're specifically interested in hearing from, or any focuses you're interested in hearing from. So, all right, cool. I'm gonna go ahead and stop the video. I'll upload it to YouTube, and then I'll hop around and see what I can help with.